It was a rare, tranquil evening in Lake Haven, a secluded lakeside neighborhood where life's biggest pleasures came from still water and rustling trees, and where its biggest menace carried a clipboard. I had bought my retirement home here hoping for peace, but I soon discovered that peace had a gatekeeper, Karen Whitaker. Karen was a woman fueled by rules, wielding her HOA authority like a sword. With her ever-present pink visor, she patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk, hunting for infractions and documenting them like a crime scene investigator. For her, control wasn't a duty, it was an obsession. I, on the other hand, was a man of simple pleasures. After clearing out an old, forgotten fire pit behind my lakeside home, one that hadn't seen a flame since before the HOA reigned supreme, I decided to celebrate. Alone, under the vast canopy of stars, I lit a small fire and roasted marshmallows, the kind of innocent joy I hadn't indulged in since childhood. But innocence had no place in Karen's kingdom. The crackle of burning was quickly joined by the sharp click of a phone camera. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, phone raised, capturing evidence like an overzealous detective. Her voice cut through the night like a siren. "You're in violation of HOA Code 7.3.1. Open flames prohibited," she snapped, her tone leaving no room for discussion. I exhaled slowly, keeping my temper at bay. "Karen, it's just a few marshmallows. No one's in danger." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not your decision to make. One ember, and you could set the entire forest ablaze." Before I could respond, she was dialing 911. "Yes, officer, we have an open flame emergency at Lake Haven. Immediate response required." I sat back, stunned at the escalation. Within minutes, red and blue lights danced across the lake surface. A lone officer stepped out, his expression caught somewhere between amusement and irritation. "Sir," he sighed, "we got a call about a fire hazard." "It's a marshmallow roast," I explained, gesturing to the harmless scene. "No bigger than a birthday candle." After a brief inspection, the officer issued a verbal warning, clearly uncomfortable being drawn into this neighborhood squabble. "Try to avoid open flames, even small ones. It'll keep the peace." With a final glance at Karen, who stood victorious on the sidelines, he left. But the night wasn't over. The next morning, taped to my front door like a scarlet letter, was a $500 fine from the HOA, signed in bold, aggressive handwriting. Karen Whitaker, Compliance Committee Chair. The message was clear. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. Neighbors watched from behind closed blinds, whispering their sympathies but offering no public support. Karen thrived on the silence, ruling by fear and technicalities. That afternoon, as I stared at the citation, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to roll over and let my peace be dictated by a woman who mistook authority for righteousness. I walked down to the lake, the evening sun painting the water gold. My reflection stared back, resolute and defiant. If Karen wanted a war over marshmallows, she was going to get one. But unlike her, I wouldn't rely on petty fines and late-night phone calls. No, I would fight smart. And in a place where rules reign supreme, the first step to winning was learning the game better than the person who wrote the playbook. Karen's campaign against me escalated quickly. Within days, I was bombarded by citations that bordered on absurd. I was fined for improperly stacked firewood that had sat untouched for months. A notice arrived claiming my grass exceeded the acceptable HOA length by a quarter inch. Even the solar-powered lanterns lining my walkway, a safety feature, were deemed unsanctioned decorative lighting. But I wasn't the only one. Over the weeks, I noticed similar notices posted on neighbors' doors. Whispers began to circulate, stories of Karen's petty tyranny. Families fined her leaving trash cans visible for an extra hour. Retirees threatened with legal action over holiday wreaths. Children's sidewalk chalk labeled vandalism. Karen ruled Lake Haven like a queen, and fear was her crown. I filed appeals, attended HOA meetings, and tried reasoning with the board. But they, too, were under her spell, intimidated or indifferent. Whenever I spoke, Karen countered with polished speeches about community standards and safety initiatives, spinning her tyranny into civic virtue. But I was patient, and I listened, and beneath the veneer of compliance, I saw it. the exhaustion in the eyes of the residents, the quiet frustration, the silent nods of solidarity. One by one, I approached them, Danielle from across the street, fined for her garden gnome. Mr. Chen threatened over his grandson's skateboard ramp. Even Lisa, who once supported Karen but had been blindsided by a fine for an unapproved mailbox color. We met in backyards, over coffee, on lakeside walks. We shared our grievances, our fears, our resolve. What Karen hadn't anticipated was that her relentless grip was forging something stronger than fear, unity. I dove deep into the HOA bylaws. Night after night, I combed through every clause, every subsection, searching for flaw in her fortress. That's when I found it buried in Section 14.2.3, Utility Easements. According to the bylaws, the main water shutoff valve for the eastern part of Lake Haven ran through my property. Any maintenance access to that valve required the property owner's consent, mine. And whose house sat at the end of that water line? Karen Whitaker's. It was poetic. I spent the next week preparing, quietly testing the valve to ensure I could turn it safely. I spoke with my allies, gauging their support. They were ready for Karen to understand what it felt like to have your peace stripped away without warning. The perfect opportunity came with Karen's annual Lake Haven Spring Gala, an ostentatious event where she paraded her manicured lawn, boasted about compliance awards, and subtly reminded everyone who really ran Lake Haven. The entire neighborhood would be there. It was the stage she had built for herself, and where her downfall would begin. The morning of the gala, as vendors set up tents and caterers unloaded supplies, I made my move. With a steady hand, I turned the valve. Slowly, methodically, I cut the water supply to Karen Street. No water for sprinklers. No water for the kitchen. No water for the pristine bathroom she flaunted on every home tour. Within an hour, panic began to ripple through the festivities. "There's no water pressure," a caterer shouted. "I can't rinse the dishes," someone else cried. Guests began whispering. Some slipped away quietly. Others openly voiced their annoyance. Karen, catching wind of the disturbance, stormed towards me, face flushed with fury. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice sharp enough to cut glass. I met her gaze calmly. "Routine maintenance on my property. Safety first, right? HOA Regulation 14.2.3 requires me to protect community utilities." She sputtered, caught between outrage and the realization that she couldn't legally override my rights. "Turn it back on now," she hissed. I held up a highlighted printout of the bylaws. "As soon as I finish ensuring everything is secure, wouldn't want an unsafe water line jeopardizing community welfare." She threatened lawsuits, emergency board meetings, personal vendettas. But this time, the audience wasn't backing her. People watched with guarded smiles. Some even chuckled quietly. By the end of the afternoon, vendors packed up early. Guests made their exits, and Karen stood alone on her now-dry, sun-scorched lawn, her gala ruined, her power visibly cracked. I hadn't solved everything. Not yet. But for the first time, Karen Whitaker tasted what it was like to be powerless. And that was only the beginning. Karen's humiliation at the spring gala sent ripples through Lake Haven. For the first time in years, people spoke openly at the mailbox, during evening walks and across back patios, about her reign of terror. The fear that won silence and began a fracture, replaced by cautious optimism. But Karen wasn't finished. She retaliated with renewed vigor. Within days, she filed complaints against my allies. Danielle's raised garden beds were suddenly violations of height restrictions. Mr. Chen's porch swing became a hazard to public safety. Lisa's mailbox, previously approved, was now declared non-compliant in color tone. It was Karen's last gasp of control, a desperate attempt to reassert her power. But something had changed. People weren't afraid anymore. I organized our next move. We drafted a petition calling for an emergency HOA board review. The bylaws allowed for it. If 25% of homeowners signed, the board was obligated to convene. We canvassed the neighborhood, door by door, conversation by conversation. Some residents were hesitant, scarred by years of petty governance. But most, tired and fed up, signed without hesitation. Karen tried to stop us. She patrolled the streets, confronting residents, spreading rumors of anarchists undermining community safety. But where fear once lived, now there was resolve. People listened, nodded politely, then signed petition anyway. 2 weeks later, we presented the signatures at the HOA meeting. The atmosphere was tense. Karen, seated at the head of the table, clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. I stood before the board and spoke plainly. This community was built on shared respect and peace. I began, voice steady. But somewhere along the way, enforcement replaced empathy. Compliance replaced community. We're here to correct that. Gasps, murmurs, and a few quiet nods rippled through the crowd. I handed the petition to the secretary. As per HOA Bylaw 3.4.2, we request a vote of no confidence against Karen Whitaker in her role as compliance chair. Karen rose, face pale but defiant. "This is a coup," she hissed. "An unlawful power grab. I've upheld the rules when no one else had the courage." "You upheld fear," I countered calmly. "Not the community." The board fell silent. For the first time, they saw the division their inaction had caused. After a deliberation that stretched longer than anyone expected, the board returned. In a narrow vote, they stripped Karen of her compliance powers, placing them under an interim committee comprised of 3 rotating residents, voted in monthly. It wasn't a complete overthrow, but it was a start. Karen stormed out without another word, leaving behind only the faint click of her heels. But the struggle wasn't over. Power leaves a vacuum. Some feared what might fill it next. Others wondered if Karen would find another way to strike back. I knew better than to think she'd disappear quietly. That night, I walked along the lake, the water still and reflective. Lisa joined me, her voice thoughtful. "She won't let this go," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, watching a single ripple break the lake's surface. "But neither will we." The next morning proved her right. My water supply, the very one I controlled, was mysteriously tampered with. Someone had tried to sabotage the valve. The message was clear. Karen wasn't gone. She was lurking, wounded but dangerous. We reinforced our resolve. I documented the sabotage and reported it to the proper HOA channels, ensuring transparency. We scheduled community safety workshops, not just for utilities but for conflict resolution, inviting all residents, including Karen. Some came out of curiosity, some out of genuine concern. Karen, however, was conspicuously absent. Despite the tensions, change was beginning to take hold. Neighbors who barely spoke before now shared tools and swapped stories. Children played freely again, their chalk art returning to sidewalks. For the first time in months, Lake Haven felt like a community, not a battleground. But I remained vigilant. Tyrants don't fade quietly. They wait, they plot, they look for weakness. The final showdown was yet to come. The following week brought an uneasy calm. Karen had retreated, but her shadow still lingered over Lake Haven. Every morning, I half expected to find a new violation notice taped to my door. But none came. Her silence was unsettling, like the eye of a storm. But the community was changing. Our neighborhood meetings evolved from tense confrontations into collaborative gatherings. Ideas flowed, installing community benches, organizing cleanup days, creating a welcome committee for new residents. People who had once feared speaking up now offered solutions. Slowly, Lake Haven began to feel like home again. Yet, the final test came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after Karen's ousting, a sudden storm flooded the east side of the lake. Debris clogged the drainage systems, threatening to overflow into several homes, including Karen's. Emergency crews couldn't reach the blockage quickly enough. Someone had to act. Word spread fast. I grabbed my tools and headed to the flood zone. To my surprise, several neighbors were already there. Danielle, Mr. Chun, Lisa, all working together to clear the debris. And standing among them, soaked and silent, was Karen. She wasn't barking orders. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She was simply there, doing what needed to be done. For a moment, the past dissolved. I handed her a shovel. She took it without a word. Hours later, the floodwaters receded. The crisis was averted. People stood together, muddy and exhausted, but smiling. It was the first time in months we had faced a challenge not as enemies, but as neighbors. That night, a meeting was called, not out of anger, but out of hope. The Interim Compliance Committee proposed new community guidelines, clear, fair, and voted on by all residents. No more hidden clauses, no more arbitrary fines. The vote passed unanimously. Karen, seated quietly in the back, listened. When the floor opened for comments, she stood. "I forgot what this place was supposed to be," she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I thought rules were enough to hold us together. I see now I was wrong." A hush fell over the room. Then a single clap, followed by another, and another. Karen sat down, not as the queen of the HOA, but as a neighbor finally ready to listen. In the weeks that followed, she faded from the spotlight. She still walked her poodle at dawn, but the pink visor and clipboard were gone. In her place was a woman learning, slowly, to be part of communities she once ruled. As for me, I rebuilt the old fire pit, this time with permits and community support. On a warm Friday evening, I invited everyone for a bonfire by the lake. Families gathered, kids toasted marshmallows, and laughter echoed across the water. Under the starlit sky, I realized peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, but from confronting it and finding common ground on the other side. The lake, once a battlefield, was now a gathering place. The scars of our battles remained, but they no longer defined us. Instead, they reminded us what it meant to stand up, to speak out, and to rebuild. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the glow of the fire, the faint ripple of the water whispered a quiet truth. Sometimes, all it takes to change a community is one person who refuses to back down.